On March 20th, Premier Jason Kenney announced the formulation of his Economic Recovery Council, and he said they were getting to work. According to the Premier, the Council is made up of experts who will provide advice on how to protect jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic and focus on strategies for long-term recovery from the crisis, including ways to diversify our economy. Well, it's been exactly 2 months since this was announced. The economy is beginning to reopen, and Albertans still have very little idea about what these strategies will be. However, we do know a few things about some parts of this council. We know it's chaired by Dr. Jack Mintz, and it also includes Stephen Harper. And recent comments by these two members of the council have offered some insight into the advice Jason Kenney is, unfortunately, receiving. Jack Mintz has written several recent op-eds in the Financial Post advocating for more cuts to the public sector and lower corporate taxes. In addition, he's argued that at a time when people are working harder than any other times in their life, in some cases even putting their lives on the line, that we should be making plans to cut their pay. On top of this, Harper wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that the way forward is more cuts to government programs. Let's be clear. It is government programs that care for seniors, that run our public health systems, that are meant to ensure workers are protected when we ask them to go to work in unsafe situations. These are the things that he is talking about slashing. And I think it is safe to say that Premier Kenney is listening to the advice of both men. Jack Mintz, after all, was quoted in the UCP platform when he said that the UCP's $4.7 billion corporate tax giveaway was going to create 55,000 full-time jobs. And just as a reminder, that $4.7 billion corporate tax giveaway had actually thus far, up until when the pandemic had started, resulted in the loss of almost 50,000 full-time jobs. Not 55,000 jobs being created, but almost 50,000 jobs being lost. As well, as a result of that cut, we saw head offices close up shop and move south of the border. We saw them laying people off, and we saw foreign shareholders receive bigger payoffs than they had in years. And all of that led to massive service cuts. For instance, ripping up the doctor contract and threatening to fire nurses on the eve of a pandemic. So it's very troubling to hear that these folks are still the ones who are giving advice to our Premier, because we know when we're worried that the Premier is listening to this terrible and outdated advice. And we've seen some indications that Jason Kenney is planning to act on it. He's already been clear he still plans to go ahead with cuts to physician pay. And the planned layoffs for nurses, over 1,000 of them, have only been delayed, not canceled. This is short-sighted. And it's also short-sighted because after these doctors and nurses have put their own health and safety on the line to keep us safe from COVID-19, Jason Kenney is planning to turn around and cut their pay. When it comes to the very best way forward for the economy and our economic recovery, here's what we actually know to be true. The evidence has been borne out in jurisdictions across the world. Slashing and cutting extends recessions and economic hardship, especially for those who can least afford it. Jason Kenney is using this pandemic as cover to force an extreme agenda on Albertans, one that was in play long before this pandemic, one that's all about putting public servants and cutting public services from Albertans. But at a time when over 500,000 Albertans have lost income due to the pandemic, this is not the time for more cuts, more layoffs, and reduced economic activity. Cutting services, firing public sector workers, slashing the important programs that Alberta families across the province rely on will only make the recession worse and longer. If anything, this pandemic has shown us the importance of a strong public sector, especially a well-funded public health care system, and its government support that is getting many unemployed and underemployed Albertans through this pandemic. To turn around and make cuts to these programs will have disastrous consequences on the health of Albertans and our economy. And finally, this pandemic has shown us the importance of a diversified economy. Our province is facing the double economic shock of COVID-19 and the drop in the price of oil. Indeed, this is the third oil price shock that we have faced in the last 6 years. Each one of these shocks has been difficult for Albertans and our economy. But instead of doubling down on the UCP's failed policies, what we actually need to be doing is doubling our efforts to diversify our economy by building a stronger, more resilient economy, one that is more self-sufficient, innovative, and less reliant on external actors and luck. Now, more than ever, we need bold, compassionate, and courageous leadership. We need it to get through this pandemic, and we need it to get through the economic crisis that we will face. We need an economic recovery plan that protects the livelihoods of everyday Albertans as much as those important donors of Jason Kenney and his friends. And we need a plan that does more than just pad their pockets. Jason Kenney has a choice. He can rely solely on the advice of his UCP echo chamber in an outdated race to the bottom that will hurt regular Albertans and their families, or he can invest in a modern, diversified economy that builds our province up and brings us together. Albertans need to know that they have a government that not only has their backs during this pandemic, but will have their backs in the long term. And a government that is absolutely laser-focused on building an economic recovery that will support all Albertans.